The sound of the key in the lock, the one I always use, the one that was supposed to open my door, felt wrong. It wasn't the usual smooth turn, the familiar click. This time it grated, resisted like the house itself was trying to tell me something. And then the deadbolt. I never used the deadbolt when I was just popping out for groceries. My stomach tightened. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of unfamiliar cologne hit me the moment the door grudgingly gave way. It was a cheap, musky smell, the kind Kyle always favored, trying to mask the scent of stale beer and desperation. But Kyle lived 3 states away, supposedly. The living room was a disaster zone. Not my usual slightly cluttered, but clean space. This was violated. Cushions were slashed, my favorite reading lamp lay shattered, its shade bent like a broken wing. My mail was ripped open and scattered across the floor I'd spent a weekend painstakingly tiling. And then I saw him. Not Kyle, not yet. A man I didn't know, burly with a clipboard sticking a bright orange notice on my refrigerator. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing in my house? My voice was sharper, louder than I intended, echoing in the sudden tense silence. He turned, startled, his eyes flicking over me with a look of pity. No, it was more like detached assessment. Ma'am, are you Natalie Hayes? Yes, I'm Natalie Hayes. And this is my house. Who are you and why are you vandalizing my property? I could hear the tremor in my voice, but I stood my ground, my grocery bags dropping to the floor, oranges rolling towards his steel toed boots. He just sighed a weary sound. Ma'am, according to our records, this property was transferred to a Mr. Kyle Hayes 2 months ago. We're from Sterling Financial. There's an overdue notice on the new mortgage secured against this property. The words hit me like a physical blow. Transferred, new mortgage. My breath hitched. My meticulously planned life, the one I'd clawed my way up to build stone by painstaking stone, was crumbling around me, and the air was suddenly thick with the dust of betrayal. That's impossible. I stammered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I bought this house. My name is on the deed. My mortgage is with Crestview Bank and it's current. He just pointed to the notice on the fridge. Sterling Financial holds the current lien, ma'am. The original mortgage was paid off. This one's in the names of Kyle Hayes and Natalie Hayes. Both our names. My mind reeled a chaotic slideshow of images, my parents, their smiling faces, the thick stack of documents they'd pushed in front of me just over 2 months ago. Estate restructuring dad had said, his voice all reassuring warmth. Just to make things simpler down the line, sweetie. For you and Kyle. Simpler. For them. My mother nodding enthusiastically, refilling my iced tea, her eyes a little too bright. It's just legal stuff, honey. You know your father always thinking ahead. I'm Natalie Hayes. I'm 34 years old, a senior financial analyst for a major healthcare provider in Phoenix, Arizona. Or at least I was until this moment. The life I thought I had, the one I'd earned with scholarships that covered my out of state tuition, an honors degree in finance, and years of scrimping and saving every damn penny to buy this little bungalow in a decent neighborhood. That life felt like a figment of my imagination. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had praised my younger brother Kyle, the family's anointed genius, my whole life. Despite him barely scraping through community college and bouncing from one half-baked get-rich-quick scheme to another. My achievements were met with polite nods. Kyle's slightest whim was celebrated. And now this. They hadn't just handed him my inheritance. They'd gift-wrapped my present, my future, and delivered it to him on a silver platter, all while looking me in the eye and smiling. The man from Sterling Financial was saying something about payment deadlines, about foreclosure proceedings. His voice was a dull drone in the background. All I could focus on was a faint, almost invisible smear of grease on the door jamb near the kitchen, something I hadn't noticed before. Kyle. He'd been here. He'd probably changed the locks. That's why my key felt wrong, the cheap cologne, the casual destruction. It was his signature. And my parents, they'd handed him the pen. The buzzing in my ears wasn't just shock. It was the sound of an engine revving, a sports car engine, the kind Kyle had always drooled over in magazines. And a cold, hard knot of fury began to form in the pit of my stomach, a single, sharp point of clarity in the swirling chaos. They thought I was just Natalie, the quiet, dutiful daughter. They'd forgotten I was also Natalie, the financial analyst who knew how to follow a paper trail, and I would follow this one all the way to hell if I had to. The sterile silence of my temporary apartment, a tiny, soulless box compared to my vibrant, violated home, was a breeding ground for the ghosts of my own naivety. Each tick of the cheap wall clock echoed the words on those legal documents estate restructuring. How could I, a financial analyst who dissected complex portfolios for a living, have been so blind? I replayed that afternoon in my mind 1,000 times. Mom had baked my favorite lemon bars, the scent filling their pristine, too formal living room. Dad had been jovial, clapping me on the back, telling me how proud they were of my. Well, he never quite finished that sentence, usually trailing off into some anecdote about Kyle's latest brilliant idea. The documents were thick, filled with jargon. Just sign here, here, and here, sweetie. Mom had chirped her finger, guiding my pen. It's all standard. Your father's lawyer drew it up. Top notch. I remember hesitating a little flicker of unease. There was a page titled Quitclaim Deed and another that mentioned a power of attorney, albeit vaguely worded around management of family assets. When I'd asked about the quitclaim, Dad had waved his hand dismissively. It's just to put the house into the family trust, Natty. For tax purposes. Makes it cleaner for inheritance. It's still your house in essence, just managed within the family structure we're setting up. His explanation was smooth, reassuring, preying on my deeply ingrained desire for their approval for a sense of belonging in a family that always seemed to hold me at arm's length. I'd wanted to believe them so badly. I'd spent my life craving their validation. I'd aced every test, won every award, secured scholarships so I wouldn't be a financial burden, bought my own house to prove my independence and worth. All of it a silent plea. See me. Value me. And in that moment, with the warmth of the lemon bars still on my tongue and their carefully constructed facade of familial concern, I'd let my guard down. I'd signed. Now the memory was a brand searing into my conscience. The pain wasn't just about the house, the bricks and mortar. It was the crushing weight of their calculated deception, the years of subtle dismissals and overt favoritism for Kyle, culminating in this grand, devastating act of betrayal. My carefully curated collection of first edition novels, the garden I'd lovingly tended, the vibrant teal accent wall I'd painted in the bedroom, all tainted, all pawns in their game. They hadn't just stolen my house. They'd stolen my trust, my sense of security, my belief in the very foundation of family. But as the initial shockwaves subsided, something else began to bubble up through the grief, a cold, hard rage. It wasn't the explosive shouting kind. It was a focused, analytical fury, the kind that sharpened my thoughts and narrowed my vision onto a single objective. They thought I was a pushover. They thought I'd crumble. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden stash of cash or a powerful connection. It was my brain, the very thing they'd always praised in Kyle while overlooking in me. Years spent navigating the labyrinthine world of finance, poring over spreadsheets, financial statements, and tax codes. That was my arsenal. And I knew with a chilling certainty that Kyle, in his arrogance and haste to flaunt his newfound wealth, would have been sloppy. My first call was to a former colleague, Sarah, now a bulldog of a forensic accountant. Natalie, long time. What's up? You sound different. I need your skills, Sarah. Off the books for now. I think my family's committed massive fraud and I'm ground zero. I laid it out the house, the suspicious documents, Kyle's sudden sports car. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Nat, your brother, wasn't he always into those slightly shady online ventures? The ones that promised quick cash for minimal effort? A vague memory surfaced. Kyle years ago bragging about some online cryptocurrency scheme, then later about importing exclusive electronics that never seemed to materialize for his supposed customers. My parents had always dismissed my concerns. He's just being enterprising, dear Mom would say. It takes time to find your footing. That was one of the sneaky hints I'd missed, the small, almost invisible threads of their long-term enabling. And Dad's recent nervous comments about tight finances and needing to consolidate assets wisely before the whole estate restructuring pitch, it all clicked into place with a sickening thud. He wasn't just thinking of future inheritance. He was probably trying to shield their assets because he knew Kyle was a ticking time bomb. I started digging using every legal means at my disposal. The bank that issued the new mortgage, Sterling Financial, was initially tight lipped, but a carefully worded letter from a lawyer I hired on contingency, a hungry young guy eager to make a name for himself, got them to release some information, especially when I highlighted the potential for identity fraud. And then the first big surprise hit me, not like a gentle wave, but like a rogue tsunami. It wasn't just that Kyle had used the equity from my house to buy a $150,000 sports car, that was just the tip of the iceberg. As I meticulously traced the money trail from the new mortgage, I found it didn't just go to a car dealership. Large sums were funneled into a series of shell corporations and from there into offshore accounts. And Kyle, my genius brother, had been incredibly careless with his digital footprint. He'd used a ridiculously easy to guess password for one of his less secure email accounts, one I knew from our childhood Master Kyle 88. Inside, I found a horrifying treasure trove. Invoices for consulting services to non existent companies, records of payments from dubious sources and panicked emails to my parents begging for more money to cover unexpected business expenses. This wasn't just about him stealing my house to buy a toy. This was bigger. Kyle wasn't just a reckless spender. He was involved in systematic tax evasion and potentially other illicit activities on a scale that made my blood run cold. And the emails implicated my parents, not just as enablers, but as active participants, helping him launder money through their own accounts, falsifying gift letters, and strategizing how to hide his income from the IRS. They weren't just trying to give their favored son a leg up, they were his partners in crime. The betrayal was far deeper, far more rotten than I could have ever imagined. The estate restructuring wasn't about simplifying inheritance. It was about liquidating my most significant asset to bail Kyle out of a massive hole he'd dug for himself, and likely to keep their own involvement hidden. My grief morphed into a steely resolve. This wasn't just about getting my house back anymore. This was about justice. And I, Natalie Hayes, the overlooked daughter, the quiet financial analyst, was about to become their worst nightmare. The vague, greasy smear on the door jamb. Kyle's presence wasn't just him staking a claim. It was him leaving a trail. And I was already on it. The discovery of their deeper complicity lit a fire under me. My small temporary apartment became a war room. Spreadsheets covered the flimsy dining table timelines were taped to the walls, and the hum of my laptop was a constant companion as I cross-referenced bank statements, email chains, and Kyle's poorly concealed digital breadcrumbs. My lawyer, a young, tenacious guy named Ben Carter, was initially just focused on the fraudulent property transfer. But as I fed him the evidence of the larger financial conspiracy, his eyes lit up with a different kind of hunger, the kind that smelled a landmark case. Natalie, he'd said, leaning back in his chair, a rare smile cracking his usually serious face. This is this is extraordinary. Your brother isn't just a petty thief. He's constructed a fairly elaborate, albeit clumsy, house of cards, and your parents are holding the foundation. My big move wasn't a single dramatic confrontation. It was a meticulously orchestrated campaign. First, we armed the IRS. I compiled a whistleblower report that was surgical. In its precision, a detailed chronology of Kyle's undeclared income, the flow of funds through shell corporations, evidence of my parents' complicity in structuring transactions to avoid reporting thresholds, and even flagged Kyle's ostentatious spending. The sports car lavish trips he'd posted about on social media, another one of his genius moves, all funded by illicit cash. I walked into the IRS field office in downtown Phoenix with a binder thick enough to stop a door. I explained, narrating the memory as if reliving it. The agent who took my case, a stoic woman named Ms. Albright, didn't say much, but her eyes told me she'd seen this kind of family, implosion fueled by greed story before. And she looked like she relished the prospect of untangling this particular knot. Simultaneously, Ben initiated civil proceedings to freeze any assets traceable to the fraudulent mortgage on my house. He argued successfully that there was a high risk of dissipation of assets, a legal term for Kyle's probably going to spend it all or hide it if we don't act fast. The court agreed. Kyle's shiny new sports car was impounded before he'd even gotten his first oil change. But I knew the IRS moved at its own pace. Justice in their world was a slow, grinding machine. I needed something faster, something to strip away the veneer of respectability my parents had so carefully cultivated in their suburban community. So I contacted a local investigative journalist, Maria Fuentes, known for her exposés on white collar crime and corruption. I'd followed her work for years, admiring her tenacity. I gave her the sanitized, publicly verifiable parts of the story, the house theft, the glaring evidence of Kyle's sudden, unexplained wealth, and the public records showing my parents' names on some of his suspicious business registrations. Maria, a whirlwind of focused energy with a microphone that seemed permanently attached to her hand, was like a shark sensing blood in the water. This isn't just a family dispute, Natalie, she'd said, her voice low and intense after our first meeting. This has all the hallmarks of a much larger story about financial exploitation and the abuse of trust. People need to hear this. The fallout from Maria's initial online piece was swift. It didn't name names at first, just a prominent Phoenix family and allegations of elder financial abuse and suspicious financial dealings by a favored son. But it was enough to send ripples of unease through my parents' social circles. Then came the segment on Arizona Uncovered, a local primetime news magazine show Maria also contributed to. This time, with more evidence surfacing and the civil suit becoming public record, they didn't hold back as much. They showed blurred images of my parents' house, the sports car being towed, and discussed the type of schemes Kyle seemed to be involved in. They didn't use our names directly on air yet, but the details were specific enough. My father, a mid level executive at a well respected local engineering firm, was suddenly asked to take a leave of absence. My mother, who prided herself on her charity work and her position on the board of a local arts foundation, found her calls going unreturned. Her carefully constructed world of bridge clubs and fundraising galas began to crumble. Kyle, of course, had vanished, or so I thought. His accounts were largely frozen thanks to Ben's quick work on the civil front, and I assumed he was hiding out somewhere panicking. The IRS, nudged by the public attention and the thoroughness of my report, started moving faster than I anticipated. They assigned a dedicated investigative team. Then came the second big surprise. It arrived not with a bang, but with a nervous, hesitant phone call from a woman I barely knew. A distant cousin on my mother's side, Carol. She lived in Tucson, and we hadn't spoken in years. Natalie, it's Carol, your Aunt Ginny's daughter. Her voice was trembling. I I saw that news report about a Phoenix family. And well, your mom called me hysterical a few weeks ago, before any of this blew up publicly. My heart rate picked up. What did she say, Carol? She was asking for money, a lot of it. Said Kyle was in some kind of trouble, something about some bad investments, and people who weren't very nice were looking for him. She said your dad was trying to restructure their assets to protect themselves and help Kyle. Carol paused, then continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. She said they were worried Kyle had gotten mixed up with some really dangerous people. Not just tax stuff, Natalie. She mentioned loan sharks, maybe even something about him owing money to a biker gang he'd tried to impress with some fake investment scheme. She was terrified. She made me swear not to tell anyone, especially you. She said you wouldn't understand, that you'd always been jealous of Kyle. Jealous. The word was a bitter pill. The betrayal, it turned out, wasn't just about greed or favoritism. It was about a desperate, misguided attempt to save Kyle from consequences far more immediate and threatening than the IRS. They'd stolen my house not just for a sports car, but potentially to pay off violent criminals. My parents weren't just complicit in his financial crimes. They were trying to shield him from a darker, more dangerous world he'd blundered into. This was the something worse hinted at by the offshore accounts and shell companies. It wasn't just about hiding money from the government. It was about washing it, or hiding it from people who played by entirely different rules. This revelation didn't make me want to back down. It solidified my resolve, but also added a layer of fear I hadn't anticipated. These weren't just white-collar criminals. Kyle had dragged them, and by extension me, to the edge of something much uglier. My helpers in this were Ms. Albright at the IRS, who became surprisingly communicative as the scope widened, and Maria Fuentes, who, upon hearing this new anonymized angle, started digging into Kyle's known associates with even more fervor. A hurdle emerged: my parents, through a newly hired aggressive lawyer, started a smear campaign. They leaked select out of context emails to a rival news blog, painting me as a disgruntled, vindictive daughter, upset about not being the sole beneficiary of their supposedly modest estate. They claimed I was mentally unstable trying to extort them. It was a desperate, ugly tactic, but for a few days it cast a shadow of doubt. The stress was immense. There were sleepless nights where I questioned if I was strong enough to see this through, if the cost of this fight was worth it. But then I'd remember the cold dread of seeing that orange sticker on my refrigerator, the casual cruelty in my parents' smiles as I signed those papers, and Carol's frightened voice describing my mother's frantic call. My fight wasn't just for my house anymore. It was for a truth that was far more complex and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And the thought of Kyle, my genius brother, not only evading taxes, but tangled with actual criminals made the need for exposure even more urgent. The primetime show Family Fraudsters was now very interested in the full story, especially with this new dangerous undercurrent. The Family Fraudsters segment was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, a brutal, unflinching expose. Maria Fuentes, with her calm, authoritative narration, laid out the whole sordid saga, The Theft of My House, Kyle's elaborate tax evasion schemes, my parents' deep complicity, and hinted at, through shadowed interviews with law enforcement sources, Kyle's dangerous dalliances with criminal elements. They used my on the record interviews sparingly, but effectively my voice clear and steady as I detailed the initial betrayal. They showed the legal documents, the trail of money, the sports car, and even managed to get footage of my parents frantically trying to avoid their cameras. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. My father's company, which had initially just put him on leave, terminated his employment, citing their ethics clause. My mother was swiftly voted off every board she sat on, her social standing evaporating overnight. The Arts Foundation issued a public statement distancing themselves from her. Kyle, who had apparently resurfaced briefly to try and access some obscure crypto wallet, was apprehended by federal agents at a coffee shop in Flagstaff, looking disheveled, and a far cry from the flashy image he'd tried to project. His arrest was front page news. The IRS, armed with the evidence I'd provided and their own rapidly progressing investigation, moved to seize assets. The house, my house, was now entangled in a legal mess, a significant asset tied to fraudulent activities. But Ben, my lawyer, was already working on it. The fact that you were a victim of the initial fraud, Natalie, and the clear evidence that the subsequent mortgage was obtained through deception and used to fund illegal activities gives us a strong position, he assured me. It'll take time, but we'll argue for the property to be disentangled and eventually returned or made available. The criminal investigation into Kyle expanded. The whispers about loan sharks and other unsavory characters proved to have substance. He wasn't just a white-collar tax cheat. He was a desperate, foolish man who'd made promises to dangerous people he couldn't keep. My parents faced their own set of charges, conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and various financial crimes. Their world, built on a foundation of lies and favoritism, had utterly collapsed. My win wasn't a single moment of courtroom drama, but a slow, grinding reclamation. The first surprise, the depth of Kyle's tax evasion and my parents' involvement, had armed me with the righteous fury and the evidence to act. The second surprise, Kyle's entanglement with more serious criminals, had inadvertently accelerated their downfall as law enforcement prioritized his case. It also strangely put my parents' actions into a more desperate, albeit still unforgivable light. They weren't just greedy. They were terrified, making catastrophic decisions to protect their favored son from the consequences of his own catastrophic choices. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of legal wrangling, the house went to a foreclosure auction, a consequence of the unpaid fraudulent mortgage Kyle had taken out. It was a public auction held on the steps of the Maricopa County Courthouse. I was there, my heart pounding. I had savings meticulously rebuilt and a small loan secured against my future earnings. I'd spent months preparing for this. I wasn't going to let it go. I stood there amidst a small crowd of property speculators and bargain hunters, and I bid. And then I bid again and again, until the auctioneer's hammer fell and the words "sold to Ms. Natalie Hayes" echoed in the dry Arizona air. I stood on the porch of my house, the real keys in my hand, the keys I had made. After changing all the locks again, I recall the emotion still thick in my voice. The orange sticker from Sterling Financial was long gone, but I could still see its ghost on the refrigerator if I looked hard enough. The cheap cologne scent had finally faded. It was mine again. Truly mine. Moving day was quiet, just me and a couple of movers. As they carried my salvaged furniture back into the rooms where it belonged, I saw them. My parents and Kyle. Kyle was out on bail awaiting trial, looking pale and thin. My parents looked broken. Older diminished the arrogance and condescension gone replaced by a hollow weariness. They were huddled beside a rusted ancient RV parked down the street, its faded paint and threadbare curtains a stark symbol of their new reality. They watched me, their faces a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Shame, resentment, perhaps a flicker of something else. I walked to the end of my driveway, the freshly cut grass soft under my feet. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unspoken words with years of pain. Kyle wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother just stared at the RV. My father looked at me, a silent plea in his gaze. If you need a place to stay, I said, my voice even devoid of the warmth it once held for them, yet not entirely filled with the ice I thought would be there. It was just empty. There's an empty RV out front. It wasn't an offer of reconciliation. It was a statement of fact, a reflection of the new order. They had made their choices, and these were the consequences. I turned and walked back into my house leaving them to their rusted chariot of misfortune. My thoughts on the whole ordeal are complex. There's a grim satisfaction, yes. I fought back and I won. I exposed their lies and they faced the consequences. The Natalie who signed those papers in her parents' living room, hungry for their approval, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth forged in the fires of betrayal, but the victory was tinged with a profound sadness. This was my family. The ties, however damaged and toxic, were still there like phantom limbs. There was no joy in their destruction, only a grim necessity. The first surprise the tax evasion showed me, the enemy was more corrupt than I imagined. The second surprise, Kyle's deeper criminal ties showed me they were also more desperate and foolish, and it made the whole situation more dangerous and ultimately more tragic. My future, it's here in Phoenix. I kept my job, my boss surprisingly understanding once the full story came out, and after seeing my analytical skills in a new, rather personal light, even fast-tracked a promotion. I'm rebuilding not just my home, but my life. The betrayal taught me to be more discerning, to trust my instincts, and to guard my hard-earned independence fiercely. I don't know if I'll ever speak to my parents or Kyle again beyond the necessities of legal proceedings. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. But as I stand in my living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, glinting off the newly polished floors, I know one thing for sure. They stole my house, but they didn't steal my strength. They tried to take my future, but I took it back. And this time, I'm the only one holding the keys. My new life isn't about revenge anymore. It's about resilience. It's about knowing that even when your world is shattered by those you should trust the most, you can pick up the pieces and build something stronger, something truly your own on the ruins. And sometimes the quietest victories are the most profound.